That's so heartbreaking. But for her kids, the grandkids to be in the car and his kids, to see their daddy and their grandmother get killed. It was over trash. Over some freaking trash. This woman is gone. This boy is gone over some trash.
Underway for a suspect accused of shooting and killing a mother and son in Henderson. It happened last night on Maple Street. Police say they found 63-year-old Teresa Davis and her son, 26-year-old Joseph Jeffries, shot to death. Authorities are now searching for 41-year-old Michael Wright. They believe he's driving a white Hyundai Sonata. He's considered armed and dangerous. You can call the Henderson police if you have any
information. It was Father's Day in Henderson, North Carolina, a day meant for cookouts, hugs, and the laughter of children filling the warm summer air. But by the time the sun dipped low over the quiet streets, two people would be lying motionless on the ground, their lifeless bodies surrounded by the screams of three terrified children. And the reason? Not jealousy. Not money. Not some elaborate criminal plot. The spark that ignited this nightmare was trash. To understand how it came to this, you have to picture the scene. A modest neighborhood, the kind where everyone knows the sound of each other's cars and the faces of every child who plays in the yard. But beneath that surface of small-town familiarity, tension had been building. Two houses. Two families. One neighbor with a violent past. And an argument that had been simmering quietly until Father's Day lit the match. The victims, 57-year-old Teresa Davis, a devoted mother and grandmother, and her 37-year-old son, Joseph Jeffries Jr. A hard-working father of three. They had no idea that morning that their lives were on a countdown. That before the day was over, they would come face to face with a man who would end it all with the pull of a trigger. And the alleged shooter, Michael Wright, an ex-felon whose temper was as quick as his disregard for the law. Neighbors knew him, but no one knew just how far he was willing to go. On this day, according to police, he didn't just lose control, he took aim, in front of three young children, and left a family destroyed. In the end, it wasn't just Teresa and Joseph who were silenced. The laughter of Father's Day, the innocence of that afternoon, the sense of safety in that neighborhood, all gone in an instant. And for what? A pile of trash. Henderson, North Carolina, sits in the heart of Vance County, a place where life moves at a slower pace, and the same families have occupied the same streets for decades. The air in mid-June is heavy and warm, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and backyard barbecues. It's the kind of community where people wave from their porches and children ride bikes up and down the same cracked sidewalks their parents once played on. But like any small town, it has its undercurrents, neighborly disagreements, unspoken grudges, and, in rare and tragic cases, anger that simmers just long enough to boil over. Teresa Davis was the sort of woman people remembered for her kindness. At 57, she had the steady calm of someone who had weathered life's storms and still managed to keep her family close. She was a mother, a grandmother, and for many in her neighborhood, a quiet anchor, someone who looked out for the people around her without asking for recognition. Her son, Joseph Jeffries Jr., was 37 years old, a father of three, and the kind of man who tried to keep to himself. He worked hard, took pride in being there for his kids, and, on this Father's Day, was simply looking forward to spending time with them. Michael Wright, however, was a different kind of neighbor. At 36, he carried the label of an ex-felon, a man whose past already had the kind of marks you can't easily erase. People in the neighborhood knew him, but there was a certain wariness about him, an edge that made casual interactions tense. His record spoke to a history of violence and poor decisions, and although he had been living quietly in recent months, his temper had not softened. According to those who knew the street, there had been small arguments before, muttered complaints, sharp words exchanged in passing, nothing that had escalated beyond irritation. Until now. In the days leading up to June 16, 2024, the issue was a pile of trash. To an outsider, it would seem petty, almost laughable, that such a thing could be the root of a deadly confrontation. But in neighborhoods like this, small disputes can take on a life of their own. The trash, where it was placed, who it belonged to, it became a trigger point, tangled in personal pride, frustration, and long-standing resentment. It wasn't just about garbage. It was about boundaries, respect, and the thin line between coexisting peacefully and turning into enemies. That Sunday morning, Joseph woke up early. It was Father's Day, and his 3 children were already buzzing with excitement. They had cards and handmade gifts ready, eager to see the smile on his face. Teresa, as she often did, was there with him, ready to spend the day alongside her son and grandchildren. The hours passed quietly at first. The children played in the yard, the hum of summer insects filling the spaces between their laughter. But somewhere nearby, in Michael Wright's mind, the irritation over that trash, that small, stupid, ordinary thing, was growing into something much darker. As the late morning hours gave way to midday, the quiet rhythm of Father's Day in the Davis Jeffries household carried on. The sun was high now, its heat settling over the neighborhood like a heavy blanket. Teresa moved in and out of the house, making sure the kids were fed, handing Joseph his favorite drink, and letting the younger ones run in and out of the small yard. There was no music playing, no loud celebration, just the soft hum of a family enjoying each other's company. But across the narrow stretch of space that separated their home from Michael Wright's, there was a different energy. Wright was restless, moving back and forth between his front yard and his doorway, his eyes occasionally fixed in the direction of the Davis Jeffries property. To anyone watching, it might have looked like nothing more than a neighbor going about his business. But for those who had seen him in the past, they knew this pacing, this way of carrying himself, it was a sign of agitation. Earlier in the week, a minor disagreement over trash disposal had turned into sharp words between Wright and Joseph. Neighbors recalled seeing them exchange gestures and hearing raised voices, but the situation had ended without a physical altercation. That argument, however, had not left Wright's mind. For him, it wasn't just trash, it was about respect, about not being ignored, and about making sure his point was heard. And on this day, the resentment was fresh enough that he seemed determined to do something about it. Joseph, for his part, wasn't looking for trouble. He kept his focus on the kids, their laughter, their excitement about the small gifts they'd made him. But he also knew Wright's temper. This wasn't the first time Wright had taken an issue too far, and while Joseph didn't want to escalate things, he also wasn't the type to back down from standing his ground. Teresa noticed it too. The way Wright's voice carried a little too loudly when he was outside, the way his movements felt deliberate, like he was working himself up towards something. By early afternoon, the atmosphere in that small pocket of the neighborhood had shifted. What began as the light-hearted tone of a family gathering now carried an undercurrent of unease. The kids didn't sense it, their world was still filled with simple joys, but Teresa and Joseph could feel the tension in the air. They didn't know when or how Wright might act, but both had a sense that his temper wasn't going to burn out quietly. Around this time, a neighbor a few houses down noticed Wright lingering in his driveway, speaking to someone briefly before heading back inside. No one thought much of it in the moment, but later, in the chaos that followed, every small detail of that afternoon would take on new meaning. Wright's phone records, his movements, the way he had been watching the Davis Jeffries property. It would all be pieced together to form a chilling picture of premeditation. As the sun began its slow descent toward late afternoon, the ordinary sounds of the neighborhood, lawn mowers, children's voices, the occasional passing car, couldn't mask the growing sense that something was building. Wright wasn't shouting yet. He wasn't making a scene. But he was present, and he was watching. And in a few short hours, that silent watchfulness would turn into sudden, explosive violence that no one on that street would ever forget. The heat of the day had begun to wane, but the air was still thick and heavy, clinging to the skin like a damp cloth. Inside Joseph's home, the children were winding down from the earlier excitement, their small voices filling the rooms with a gentle hum. Teresa stood by the doorway, watching them, occasionally stepping out to the porch to feel the faint breeze. Joseph lingered outside too, casually leaning against the railing, scanning the street with the relaxed posture of someone who had spent his life here. But even as the light softened, the tension had not broken. From down the short stretch of pavement, Michael Wright emerged again. This time, there was no pacing. No idle movements meant to disguise his agitation. His steps were slow, deliberate, and aimed in one direction, toward the Davis Jeffries home. He wasn't carrying himself like a man interested in conversation or compromise. His jaw was tight, his gaze fixed. In that moment, anyone who truly knew him would have recognized the look for what it was, the mask of someone who had already decided what he was going to do. Joseph straightened up when he saw him approaching. The children were inside, but the windows were open, and their voices floated into the humid air. Teresa stepped closer to her son, sensing the shift. Wright's voice came first, sharp, direct, no pleasantries. Words about the trash. About being disrespected. His tone carried an edge that made it clear he wasn't here to talk it out. Joseph's response was firm but measured, the way a man speaks when he's standing his ground but doesn't want to make the situation worse. But with Wright, words weren't enough. They never had been. What happened next unfolded so quickly that no one could have stopped it. Wright's hand moved, and suddenly the late afternoon quiet was shattered by the metallic crack of gunfire. The first shot rang out, startling the children inside. Teresa gasped, instinct pulling her toward her son. Joseph staggered but stayed upright long enough to turn toward his children's voices. Another shot split the air, and this time Joseph collapsed, his body hitting the warm ground. Teresa screamed his name and rushed forward, but Wright's focus shifted. Without hesitation, without a flicker of mercy, he raised the gun again and fired. The force knocked her backward, her body crumpling next to her son's.
And more breaking news now. A mother and her adult son were shot and killed in Vance County tonight. The suspect is considered armed and dangerous, and he's still at large. This happened around 6:45 this evening on Maple Street in Henderson. Police say they found 63-year-old Teresa Davis and her 26-year-old son, Joseph Jeffries Jr., dead at the scene. The WRAL breaking news tracker was on the scene earlier where there was a large police presence. Police don't have the suspect in custody, but they believe they know who he is. Take a look at this man right here. This is 41-year-old Michael Wright. Detectives have obtained warrants against him for the homicides of both the mother and her son. Police say Wright was last seen driving off in a white Hyundai Sonata with a North Carolina license plate KEE 6554. If you see him, police ask that you do not approach him. Anyone with information on where he might be should call the Henderson Police Department at 252-438-4141 or call 911 immediately. And you can look for updates on WRAL News tomorrow morning starting at 4:30 a.m.
The sound of the shots echoed off the houses, a cruel rhythm cutting through what had been an ordinary day just moments before. Inside, the children froze in shock. The smallest one began to cry, the sound raw and piercing. Another clung to the nearest sibling, unable to process the chaos outside. They could see flashes of movement through the open doorway, their father on the ground, their grandmother beside him, and the neighbor they had seen countless times now holding the weapon that had taken them both. Wright didn't run immediately. For a brief moment, he stood there, chest rising and falling, the gun still in his grip. The air smelled of gunpowder, sharp and suffocating. Then, as distant voices began to rise, neighbors shouting, footsteps pounding toward the scene, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the narrow path that led between the houses. His movements weren't rushed. They were the movements of a man who had done exactly what he came to do. By the time the first frantic calls to 911 went through, the street was alive with chaos. Neighbors were yelling for someone to help, others were pulling the children into their arms, trying to shield them from the sight of their father and grandmother lying still on the ground. Somewhere in the distance, the wail of sirens began to grow louder, drawing closer with each passing second. But for Teresa and Joseph, it was already too late. The sirens grew louder until they filled every corner of the neighborhood, the flashing red and blue lights spilling across the modest homes like a warning flare in the night. Police cruisers screeched to a stop, their tires grinding against the asphalt, followed closely by the deep rumble of an ambulance. Officers poured out of their vehicles, their radios crackling with urgent voices, each one calling out position updates and safety checks. The air was heavy with the metallic tang of spent gunpowder, mingled with the faint, sweet smell of summer flowers from nearby yards, an almost cruel reminder that just moments before, this had been an ordinary Father's Day afternoon. Paramedics rushed forward with stretchers, their hands moving in quick, practiced motions, but their faces already telling the truth. They checked for pulses, voices low, the rhythm of their movements slowing as the reality set in. Teresa Davis, 57 years old, a woman who had been tending to her grandchildren just minutes earlier, was gone. Joseph Jeffries Jr., 37, the man those children had woken up that morning to celebrate, had taken his last breath before help could reach him. Their bodies lay close together, mother and son, a final, haunting image that would burn into the minds of everyone who saw it. A cluster of neighbors stood behind the police tape that was quickly strung across the scene. Some were whispering in shock, others openly sobbing. One woman clutched a hand to her mouth, her eyes fixed on the three small children who now sat on a nearby porch in the care of an officer. The oldest, barely old enough to understand the permanence of what had happened, stared straight ahead, his small fists clenched in his lap. The youngest whimpered softly, leaning against a sibling, their little faces streaked with tears and confusion. They had witnessed something no child should ever see, and the emotional wound would linger long after the sirens faded. Inside the command post hastily set up at the end of the block, investigators were already piecing together the suspects' movements. Witness statements confirmed what officers suspected: the shooter was their neighbor, Michael Wright, a man with a criminal record, a history of volatile behavior, and now, according to multiple accounts, a killer.
A lot more about the man accused of killing his neighbor and her son in an argument over trash in Henderson.
CBS 17's Barron James has been speaking with the neighbors. He joins us live from Maple Street, where this all happened. Barron.
Yeah, Angela and Rod, family, friends, and neighbors all tell me that, ironically, Teresa Davis had just moved out of this old house to start a new life in Lewisburg, living with her son, Joseph Jeffries Jr., when tragically they both lost their lives, gunned down, one here in this driveway, the other here in the street in a car between the victim's old home and the suspect's house. Take a look at this. This is about happening on Sunday, and Teresa Davis was shot to death. Her family tells me right in front of her three grandchildren and their mom as they sat in the car in front of the 63-year-old grandmother's house, which she had dropped by on Sunday to clear things out. Just before Davis was shot, neighbors and family members tell us her 26-year-old son, Joseph Jeffries Jr., was shot and killed with his own gun by suspect Michael Wright's home. They tell us Jeffrey confronted Wright about several garbage bags thrown in his mom's front yard. The Granville County Sheriff arrested the 41-year-old Wright this morning, charging him with killing a mother and her son on Father's Day, leaving three young children, all under age 6, fatherless.
That's so heartbreaking. But for her kids, the grandkids, to be in the car and his kids, to see their daddy and their grandmother get killed, that it was over trash. Over some freaking trash. This woman is gone. This boy is gone over some trash.
Tonight, Michael Wright is locked up in the Granville County Detention Center on no bond ahead of his first appearance, adding to his long criminal rap sheet, which also includes, according to public records, nearly 11 years spent in prison for the murder of his uncle. And his latest case remains open as an active investigation back out here live into this fatal feud between neighbors over trash. For now, we're live in Henderson, Vance County. Barron James, CBS 17 News.
All right.
Patrol units spread out in every direction, scanning alleys, knocking on doors, and checking nearby streets. Wright hadn't gotten far, but he knew the area well, and the officers understood the urgency of capturing him before night fell. Back at the crime scene, the forensic team began their work. Shell casings glinted in the fading sunlight, marked carefully with small yellow evidence tents. A camera shutter clicked over and over, capturing every angle of the scene, the positions of the bodies, the scattering of belongings on the ground, even the toys the children had been playing with earlier that day. The contrast between the innocence of those objects and the brutality of the crime was almost unbearable. The children were eventually escorted away under the care of child services, each one clutching a small plastic bag containing personal items hastily gathered from their home. A stuffed animal, a crayon drawing, a folded card that read "Happy Father's Day" in uneven letters, all the reminders of the day they had been meant to celebrate. For them, there was no gentle transition from joy to grief. The change had been sudden, violent, and irreversible. As night began to settle over Henderson, the search for Wright intensified. Officers combed through wooded areas, used drones to scan open fields, and coordinated with neighboring jurisdictions. It wasn't long before the call came in. Wright had been spotted moving along a back road just outside the city limits. A brief pursuit followed, ending when officers managed to corner him near an abandoned property. He was taken into custody without further shots fired, but his arrest did nothing to undo the devastation he had left behind. In the days that followed, the neighborhood remained blanketed in a heavy, unnatural quiet. Flowers and candles began to appear on the front steps of the Davis-Jeffries home, left by friends, neighbors, and strangers who had been moved by the story. Cards with handwritten notes spoke of heartbreak, disbelief, and prayers for the children. The local church held a vigil, its small sanctuary filled with people holding candles, their faces lit by the soft, trembling glow. The pastor's voice cracked as he spoke about the fragility of life and the need to stand together against senseless violence. The funerals for Teresa Davis and Joseph Jeffries Jr. were held together, a joint service that drew mourners from across the county. The two caskets rested side by side at the front of the chapel, draped in flowers. The sound of weeping filled the room as friends and family stepped forward to share memories, stories of Teresa's unwavering kindness, of Joseph's pride in his children, of the everyday moments that made them so deeply loved. Outside, the line of vehicles and the funeral procession stretched down the street, a testament to how many lives they had touched. For the children, life would never be the same. They were now orphans, their grandmother gone, their father taken in an instant, and the only memories of that Father's Day forever stained by the sound of gunfire. Family members stepped forward to take them in, promising to give them love and stability, but everyone knew the road ahead would be long and filled with difficult questions. Michael Wright now faced a long list of charges, among them, 2 counts of first-degree murder. In court, his expression was unreadable, his eyes scanning the room without emotion as prosecutors laid out the case against him. The community waited for justice, but even a guilty verdict could not fill the void left behind. And so, in Henderson, the story of Teresa Davis and Joseph Jeffries Jr. became more than just a headline. It became a painful reminder of how quickly life can be stolen, how a single moment of rage can shatter generations, and how the smallest grievances can, in the wrong hands, become the cause of unimaginable tragedy. On that Father's Day, 2 lives were ended, 3 young ones were scarred forever, and a community learned that safety can be an illusion, one that disappears with the sound of a trigger being pulled. If there's one thing this story forces us to confront, it's how fragile life really is. Teresa Davis and Joseph Jeffries Jr. woke up that Father's Day with no warning that it would be their last. They had plans. They had love. They had a family. And in seconds, it was all taken, not by an accident, not by fate, but by a choice. A choice rooted in anger, in pride, and in a complete disregard for the value of another human being's life. We can't change what happened on that street in Henderson. We can't undo the trauma those 3 children will carry for the rest of their lives. But we can refuse to let their story fade into just another statistic. We can talk about it. We can share it. We can remember their names, Teresa Davis and Joseph Jeffries Jr. And remind others that violence doesn't just end lives, it devastates everyone left behind. So, if this story has reached you, if it has made you stop and think, I'm asking you to do something simple, but powerful. Share it. Share it so that people see the cost of a moment of rage. Share it so that we stop excusing the warning signs of violence. Share it because these children deserve a future where their parents and grandparents aren't taken from them over something so senseless. And if you believe in justice, if you believe that lives like Teresa's and Joseph's matter, then make your voice heard. Follow their case. Stand with their family. Refuse to look away, because silence is the soil where tragedies like this grow.